Here in Malaysia, the COVID-19 pandemic has left more than 667 people dead and just shy of 180,000 infected.
But alongside the pandemic is a separate yet still related crisis, raising alarm among health officials: the country's suicide rate.
494 people killed themselves during the 32 weeks of national movement restrictions, a rate of at least one death per day.
There were nearly twice as many attempted suicides. And while it's a tragedy for those who died, for those who survived the suicide attempt, it's the start of some long and rather serious legal trouble. Why? Because in Malaysia, attempted suicide is illegal.
We have seen several cases which have been prosecuted in the courts. As recent as last year, several months ago, I think it was also reported in the news where a person has been charged under this particular section and a court has eventually sentenced. Then we have also seen, again last year, there are cases where the sentence varies. There are sentences of just a fine. Then there are also sentences where the courts put them to jail for up to 7 days imprisonment. And the law allows for it. That is the law. Suicide is criminalized in Malaysia.
That's because of a subsection of the Penal Code 309 that is, in many ways, a holdover from another era. It's a law that experts say damages the country's response to mental health crises, both by penalizing people who need help and by creating an environment where suicide rates are often inaccurate and underrepresented. And it's not just Malaysia. There are also laws criminalizing suicide in Brunei, Myanmar, and Pakistan, to name a few, all countries that were once British colonies.
How well Britain can hold this loose worldwide structure together at war's end.
That's because this law, like a lot of those still in the books in post-colonial Asia, has its roots in Victorian-era England.
Our penal code originates from the Indian Penal Code. And in the Indian Penal Code was basically enacted based on the British common law. And the British common law was in turn heavily influenced by religious beliefs, which basically held that suicide is wrong as it is an offense against God. And of course, that sits in well with the Malaysian beliefs. In fact, all religion, not only Muslim, all religions will say that attempting suicide is wrong, it's an offense against God. So therefore, you have it. It is in fact a product of colonialism and religion. But the fact remains that the law is still in our books.
When we talk about decriminalization of suicidal attempts, which has happened in a lot of countries, Malaysia still criminalizes it.
Puan Anita works with MIASA, a Kuala Lumpur-based non-profit that focuses on mental health and crises in Malaysia.
People with mental health disorders will be included in society.
We are here to help you, no judgment. We provide, safe spaces. We provide, we come from a place of empathy and compassion, because a lot of times when you struggle with a condition, it's very difficult to see a way out.
Through the course of her work, Puan Anita has become intimately acquainted with the realities of Malaysia's suicide law.
So typically when a person attempts suicide, they would be treated as a criminal. That is the truth of what happens on the ground, really. If a person is or has attempted suicide, then what happens is typically they will be taken in, and they will have to be held for 3 months before a trial is being done. The environment itself is not conducive, and you're battling suicidal thoughts and ideation. You've already attempted suicide and then being treated as a criminal. Many people that are incarcerated in prison then, attempt suicide again.
There's hope for reform. In neighboring Singapore, where attempted suicide was also a criminal offense, the law was overturned last year. Advocates like Puan Anita have been fighting for a similar repeal in Malaysia, but it's been a tougher battle than expected.
It is taking longer than we expected, especially, since Singapore has already decriminalized attempted suicide last year.
So really at the end of the day, when we are dealing with a person who is attempting suicide, really, there's a lot of discretion at play here. Whether the authorities would utilize the provisions that is afforded to them, or the more better solution is whether to not put them in this whole system, because we have seen the whole complex processes that can take place. Instead of going through that, let us look at other alternative measures. If you look at Section 11, they can detain them up to 24 hours for the purposes of referring them to the necessary mental health institution. That is allowed under the current law that we have. The only question that will come to mind really is that do we have the necessary structure to support the number of them attempting suicide?
So I think that the biggest barrier to the work that we're doing is stigma. And, that's why I call stigma the true poison of it all.
So it's just a matter of, keep knocking on the doors of the government and just, pushing to the hopes that the provision would be repealed. So I remain hopeful that things can move forward with the repealing of this particular section, because I think this is a very archaic piece of legislation.